The divergence.
Welcome to the Fallout universe. Harsh, unforgiving, and home to enough giant mutated creatures to fill the nightmares of any 3 sane people. But how did it get like this? I want you to imagine 2 universes on the same path in history. One universe leads to supercomputers in your pocket. That would be ours. The other, well, that leads to flying military robots and orbital laser superweapons. But at what point in history did these universes diverge? At what point was the Fallout universe destined to become a radiation-soaked wasteland? The only thing we do know is that the divergence happened sometime after the Second World War. Rapidly shrinking stocks of oil meant that if a solution wasn't found quickly, then the modern world would grind to a halt and become a barren wasteland, full of people unable to survive. Well done, Fallout universe, that never happened. Anyway, that lack of oil led to a focus on nuclear energy that is way in advance of our universe. They created miniature nuclear fission cells that are small enough to power suits of armour and war robots for hundreds of years after uranium mining must have stopped. Small electronics that rely on transistors never developed in the Fallout universe because the transistor didn't even exist until 2076, which, as we'll come to learn, was a bit too little, a bit too late. Instead, their clunky electronics and computers rely on obsolete vacuum tubes and reel-to-reel supercomputers. Then, of course, there is the politics. And politics, like war, politics never changes. The demonisation of communism in America never changed, and that put America on a collision course with the People's Republic of China. The only thing we do know is that the divergence had occurred by 1961, where Captain Carl Bell of the United States Space Agency had become the first man in space, and also its first casualty. His orbit lasted 12 minutes, went once around the Earth, and crashed on re-entry.
The resource wars.
Owning a car in America is like owning freedom, and in the Fallout universe, it's no different. The Corvega was the most popular model from before the Great War, with the cheap price of only $199,999.99. The first production line of the Corvega sold out within days. Why? Because it had a nuclear engine. Well, that, and it was cheaper than 26 gallons of gas. At least the non-premium stuff. Yeah, the price of gas was $7,450 a gallon. By the end of 2052, the lack of fuel had seen most nations in the world go to war over the last remaining oil fields. The United Nations collapsed as its members pulled out to declare war against their neighbours for the limited reserves still available to them. Amidst the growing hostilities, the United States created the Anchorage front line to protect its pipeline from invasion. As you can imagine, Canada began to tire of demands from their southern neighbour and become increasingly hostile to American troops in their country. America is a big place, and the government knew that they were in danger, and that they only had to use a few key places for America to topple like a house of cards. So, to protect the USA from collapsing under immediate invasion, the US government broke down the USA into 13 commonwealths, adding another layer of bureaucracy between the state and federal government. In celebration, they created a new flag with 13 stars surrounding a central one, because you can't have a country, or in this case, 13 nearly separate countries, without a pretty flag. In 2066, the worst happened, and the Chinese invaded Alaska, and even the newly released power armour couldn't stop the US from losing ground. Chinese biological weapons ripped through American troops, and the USA started to see the benefits of microbial warfare. Over the next 10 years, the United States pressed Canada for resources, which caused riots, and the Canadians, hoping to remove the Americans from their soil, tried to break the pipeline. That didn't work out too well for them. The United States took this for the opportunity that it was and proceeded to violently annex Canada in 2076, shooting protesters and civilians alike. This invasion helped America to reclaim Alaska in early 2077, and the latest power armour was deployed along the Anchorage front line and in China.
The new plague.
The Chinese were much better at biological warfare than the US, and of course, the US wasn't one to take this lying down. The government started to work on a secret genetic bioweapon called Limit 115. Limit 115 was designed to make those that were infected sterile, at least those people that it didn't kill. However, Chinese agents infiltrated the labs and infected the American people. Hundreds of thousands of US citizens died, and the US had to deploy power armour in the streets to prevent an uprising. It was at that point that Limit 115 got a new name. The new name was the New Plague. And the New Plague, much like bubonic plague in the 1300s, kept on making regular appearances through the 2050s and 60s. At this point, a company called the Vault-tec research facility started to work on a virus to destroy the New Plague. It didn't work, but now they had ties to the government, and the government were using the New Plague to control the population via propaganda. So Vault-tec ended up being the natural choice for the government's pan-immunity Viron project, which was designed to protect Americans from Chinese biological warfare. The Immunity Project worked on transforming the DNA to prevent illnesses in humans caused by Chinese biological warfare. After transforming the DNA, they noticed side effects of increased muscle mass and brain activity, so people were getting stronger and smarter. The army, seeing an opportunity, took over the project. They then transferred the research to the Mariposa military base, and the virus was renamed to the Force Evolutionary Virus, or the FEV, and they were using it in hopes to create a super soldier. To that end, the Mariposa scientists started taking human test subjects from the army garrison, protecting them and exposing them to the FEV. When the soldiers learnt about this, they were outraged and they took over the base. They executed all the scientists, and Mariposa officially seceded from the Union. The new commander, Roger Maxson, led all his people to the Lost Hills emergency bunker, where they and their descendants would use the technology there to become the Brotherhood of Steel.
Project Safe House.
Project Safe House was a government initiative designed to create bunkers for the American population to take shelter in during a nuclear bombardment. The Vault-tec company was the chief contractor in creating these vaults and was supported by a group in the government called the Enclave. The Enclave were the top officials of the US government, and they were aware, as we all should be, of the benefits of having select groups of humans to study in closed environments. Vault-tec proceeded to create these vaults, but turn them into gross testing facilities designed to provide information to the Enclave and, of course, Vault-tec. This information was to be used in recolonising the planet or, potentially, relocating to another one. With the threat of nuclear war fast approaching, the members of the Enclave retreated to special locations, with their main base being the Poseidon Energy oil rig, and there they hoped to remain free from the radiation in the wastes. Vault-tec main officials had their own secret bunker where they could watch over the vaults and continue their experiments. Vault 12 was designed to remain open so they could observe the effects of radiation. This led to most of the humans turning into ghouls, at least the lucky ones. Vault 29 allowed no one over the age of 15 inside its doors. Vault 112 trapped its people in a virtual reality simulator with a psychopathic overseer. The overseer tortured the inhabitants repeatedly and they were unable to escape. Vault 87, arguably the worst, was the Vault-tec FEV research and testing facility. Complicit in these experiments was often the Vault overseer, forcing people to do their bidding. And it has been said that the vaults were never intended to save anybody.
The Great War.
23rd of October, 2077. The first nuclear missile is launched. Within minutes, hundreds of warheads all across the globe are launched, triggering Armageddon. The bombardment lasts 2 hours, and the world becomes a barren wasteland and will never be the same again.
The Master.
In 2092, Dr. Richard Moreau was exiled from Vault-tec for murder, and then proceeded to change his name to Richard Gray. Gray helped lead a caravan to the Mariposa military base and became one of 2 survivors of the mutated creatures that surrounded the base. Gray was knocked into one of the vats of the forced evolutionary virus, where he ended up floating for a month. Eventually he managed to crawl out and started an audio log. Gray was already hideously mutated and became a carnivorous creature, eating animals and eventually humans that walked into the base. Each time he did this, his mass increased and he ended up being able to fuse with the electronics around the base. Sadly, those people he consumed lived on inside his head, giving him multiple personalities. Gray began exposing people to the forced evolutionary virus. Those who ended up imperfect, he destroyed by eating them. He soon learnt that those people who were unexposed to radiation would retain their thought processes. He began to produce super mutants that ended up populating the wasteland. In 2155, the Master discovered an unused vault and decided he would relocate there, and his cult proceeded to build a giant cathedral in the hopes to create the Unity. The Unity was Gray's idea that the humans needed to be turned into super mutants for their own good, becoming a superior race fit to live in the wastelands. Sadly, at least for the super mutants are sterile. It would take a brave man or woman to enter the cathedral to inform the Master. Fortunately, it turned out one such person lived in Vault 13.